So I rented out the Grand Cypress Resort in Orlando for a weekend. Full buyout of the private event space, 3 meals a day catered, open bar, rooms for 30 people. I'm talking $40,000 out of my own pocket. And my parents sat at the head table in their matching country club polos thinking I was celebrating them. I was not celebrating them. Let me back up. My parents, Gerald and Diane Whitmore, have spent the last 30-something years cultivating a very specific image in our suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where everyone has a Chevy Tahoe in the driveway and an HOA newsletter in the mailbox. My parents had the biggest Tahoe, a fully loaded black Escalade actually, and they made sure you noticed it. Mom rotated through Louis Vuitton totes like most women rotate through lip gloss. Dad had a membership at Muirfield Village Golf Club that costs more per year than most people's car payments. They talked constantly about their investment portfolio, always vague, always impressive sounding. "We're in real estate," Dad would say at dinner parties, swirling his whiskey. "Residential development, very promising." What they didn't tell people at those dinner parties was that the investment portfolio was funded entirely by borrowing money from every aunt, uncle, and cousin in our extended family under the promise of massive returns. I found out by accident. My Aunt Patrice, my mom's older sister, a retired school librarian who lives alone in Cincinnati, called me crying in February of last year. She was trying to figure out how to pay her property tax bill, and she couldn't. She told me she had given my parents $18,000 18 months ago as her contribution to the Whitmore Family Real Estate Fund. She had a printed email from my father with the logo and everything. She'd been waiting patiently for the 10% annual return he'd promised. She hadn't seen a single dollar. I told her I'd look into it. I called my cousin Darnell in Detroit. He'd given them $25,000. My Uncle Russ in Dayton, $12,000. My mom's cousin Brenda, $8,500. Over the next 2 weeks, I made quiet phone calls to 15 different family members, and by the time I was done, I had a handwritten list on a yellow legal pad that totaled $187,000. $187,000 pulled from retirees and middle-class families who trusted my parents because they were family. Not 1 cent had been invested in anything. I know this because I hired someone to find out, a forensic accountant named Kevin, who I found through a referral from my divorce attorney. I'd used her 2 years earlier. Different disaster, different story. Kevin charged me $3,500 for what he called a preliminary financial investigation, and within 6 weeks, he handed me a 40-page report with highlighted bank statements, credit card records, and transaction histories. The money had gone into a joint personal account that my parents had never disclosed to anyone. From that account, $14,000 at Saks Fifth Avenue over an 18-month period, $22,000 in Muirfield Village Golf Club dues and event fees, $9,800 at a Louis Vuitton boutique in Columbus, multiple charges at steakhouses, wine bars, a spa in Scottsdale during a trip they told everyone was a site visit for the investment property. There was no investment property. There had never been an investment property. I sat in my kitchen for about an hour after I read that report, and I just cried. Not because I was surprised. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I think I'd known my parents were frauds for years, and I'd just been too loyal to say it out loud. I cried because Aunt Patrice couldn't pay her property tax. I cried because Uncle Russ is 71 years old, and that $12,000 was a chunk of his retirement. I cried because my parents had looked these people in the eye at Christmas dinners and 4th of July cookouts and smiled at them and taken their money and spent it on handbags. That's when I started planning. I reached back out to everyone quietly. I told them I was organizing a family reunion, a celebration of the investment's success. I said my parents had asked me to handle the logistics because they wanted it to be a surprise reveal of the returns. Everyone was thrilled. Suddenly, their patience made sense to them. Of course there'd been silence. It was building to something big. I told them the resort weekend was on me as a thank you for being such a wonderful family. I told them to dress nice. I told them to bring their spouses. I did not tell my parents any of this until 3 weeks before the event, and when I did, I kept it simple. I said I wanted to honor them. I said they deserved a celebration. My mother literally teared up on the phone. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "you didn't have to do that." "I know, Mom. I really did, though." The Friday night welcome dinner was genuinely nice. Good food, good wine, the resort staff was incredible. My parents were glowing. Dad gave a little speech about family legacy. Mom wore a new silk blouse. I noticed the Hermes tag she'd forgotten to cut out. People hugged and laughed and took pictures by the pool. I smiled through all of it and kept refilling everyone's glasses. Saturday morning, I scheduled the investment presentation for 10 o'clock in the private conference room. I had told my parents it would be a photo slideshow and update from the fund managers. I even hired a guy from Fiverr to create a convincing fake fund logo for the placeholder slides at the beginning, just to get everyone seated and settled before the real show started. Kevin, my forensic accountant, flew in Friday night. He sat in the back of the room in a blazer, quiet, waiting. All 30 people were seated by 9:58. My parents sat front and center, side by side, coffee in hand, completely relaxed. I stood up at the podium and I said, "I want to thank everyone for being here. This reunion has been a long time coming, and I want to make sure that before we celebrate, we're all looking at the same information." I clicked to the first real slide. It was a simple chart, a bar graph. On the left, the total contributions collected by Gerald and Diane Whitmore from family members. On the right, the total amount invested in any actual real estate asset. Left bar, $187,000. Right bar, $0. The room went so quiet, I could hear the resort's air conditioning. I walked through every slide. Kevin had color-coded the transactions by category. Red for designer retail, blue for club memberships, green for personal travel. I didn't editorialize, I didn't yell, I just read the line items out loud in a completely steady voice, while 30 people stared at the screen and then turned to look at my parents. My mother said, "This is a misunderstanding." Her voice came out weird and thin, like the words didn't have enough air behind them. My father said nothing. He was looking at the table. Uncle Russ stood up. He's a big guy, broad-shouldered, former union steward, not someone who raises his voice easily. He said, "Gerald, you looked me in the eye. You looked me in the eye and you shook my hand and you took my money." His voice broke at the end and I had to look at the wall because I could not cry in that room. Not yet. I handed out pre-prepared packets, one for each family, that included Kevin's full report, a summary of their individual contributions, and a one-page overview of their options in Ohio Civil Court, including small claims court for amounts under $10,000 and common pleas court for the larger claims. I had already spoken to a civil attorney who agreed to take the collective case on contingency. My parents tried to leave. My Aunt Patrice blocked the doorway. Not physically, she's 64 and about 5'2", but she stood there and she said, "You sit back down, Diane." And my mother sat back down. The civil suit was filed 4 months later. 14 family members joined as plaintiffs. The judgment came in at just under $210,000 once you added interest and court cost. My parents couldn't pay it in cash because of course they couldn't. They'd spent all of it. So the court began the asset collection process. The Escalades sold at auction for $34,000. They had to liquidate a chunk of Dad's 401k, which came with tax penalties. The Muirfields membership was surrendered. The Columbus social circle that my parents had spent decades building quietly evaporated once word got around, and in a suburb like ours, word always gets around. Last I heard, they're renting 2 rooms in a shared housing community in a town 30 miles outside Columbus. Mom's Louis Vuitton collection went on Facebook Marketplace in pieces over about 6 weeks. I saw the listings. I didn't buy anything. Aunt Patrice paid her property tax bill. Uncle Russ put his portion back in his retirement account. I keep the yellow legal pad in my desk drawer. I'm not sure why. I think I need to know that I wrote it all down before anyone else believed it was real.